Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and here's one we've all been waiting for, the newest album from Anderson .Paak called Oxnard. Man, the expectations were high for this one, weren't they? And indeed, it's been a bit amusing seeing the fallout from the early reviews of Oxnard come through. A lot of critics had seen tremendous potential and gotten really captivated by Anderson .Paak's infectious charisma and blend of genres. And I'll freely admit that at first, I was definitely one of them. Venice had primed the pump, Anderson .Paak had completely stolen the show on Dr. Dre's Compton album in 2015, which I'd still hold up as one of the best hip-hop albums of that year. And following in that wake with some terrific guest performances, I was ready for my mind to be blown with the textured smash that was Malibu, easily one of the best albums of 2016. But I was also kind of lukewarm on his work with Knowledge on their collaboration that same year under the No Worries moniker Yes Loud, because it exposed just how Anderson .Paak's charisma couldn't save fragmented songs, undercooked ideas, and a sleaziness that could get actively distracting if it was mishandled. So I was a little bit more cautious going into Oxnard. The guest performances, they looked promising, and I liked what I'd heard from some of the singles, but reception had been lukewarm thus far, and I was a little bit surprised to see that Dr. Dre seemed to have stepped up his production oversight. I guess he wanted to ensure that Anderson .Paak finally became the household name that he deserves to be. And you know what, I did like their balance on Compton, but would it work on an Anderson .Paak solo project? Would it work on Oxnard? Well folks, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but I'm gonna have to join a lot of folks in saying that Oxnard's just not really as good as Malibu was, and it's hard not to see that as a little bit of a letdown, even if you were primed by Yes Loud. What once felt more natural and free-flowing now feels abortive and more stiff than it should, which for an artist who built his entire appeal coasting on vibes and groove seems like a potentially disastrous trajectory. Now, thankfully Oxnard is still good enough to get a pass from me, mostly, but what were nitpicks on previous albums have now become full-fledged problems, and I'm not sure Anderson .Paak or his handlers, specifically Dr. Dre, are seeing as many of these problems as much as they should, and that could really be a problem down the road. And let me stress that these problems, they actually seem to come from the top down, and seem surprisingly easy to identify, so let's start off with the structure. Now, Anderson .Paak projects, even at their best, they can feel a little bit long and meandering, even as they coast off on some great vibes, but Malibu hit the balance of making it work, by giving the project a burnished, warm, charmingly rough-edged palette for all the genre blending, and coupled with snippets from the old surfer interviews to give the landscape some real organic texture. You felt like you were on those Malibu beaches. And with Oxnard, also named for a city in the greater Los Angeles area, and Anderson .Paak's actual hometown, you would expect an even more textured and personal experience. And that's not really what happened. Outside of a brief stutter of radio tuning to open up the album, the majority of this project ditches that production style altogether for something that's a lot glossier. And it's hard to avoid the sense that Dr. Dre is putting a much firmer hand on the steering wheel in his production. And since we're not getting the incredibly crisp bombast that was overblown on Compton, it's hard to avoid the sense that his brand of G-Funk has become increasingly cluttered and over-arranged over the decades, especially in the 2010s. And look, I get why Anderson .Paak might not fight that coming from Dre. We'll come back to why he probably should in a second. But it's the sort of choice that leads him to place Head Low, complete with a closing skit where the girl is blowing him in the car that triggers a car accident. It's the second song on the album. And if that was meant to characterize an album that would frequently swerve into territory that might not prove nearly as flattering to everybody else except him, well, mission accomplished, I guess. But I get the feeling that wasn't really the mission to start off with, and might not be a good amount of side effects that'll come with it. But the real loss, it comes in the production, where again, the warm grit has been seared away. And not just from the grooves, but damn near everything, including even some vocal pickups. And sure, Anderson .Paak's voice sounds smoother than ever, and there's no denying that he's got volumes of charisma, splitting the difference between hip-hop, R&B, funk, and soul, and even some disco. His uncanny ability to hang on to beats gives him a subtle advantage as a rapper, even if it's not his most natural lane. I'll give him a lot of props as a performer performer. But part of the reasons his rougher vocal expressions worked so well on Malibu was how it complemented the production. While stripping that away, it might be an easier sell for the mainstream, but it also detracts from his unique vocal personality. And what's alarming is how it doesn't just happen to him. I don't know what filters they tacked onto the verse from Dre and Pusha-T, but stripping out the more guttural, more authoritative tones to make them fit better this production does neither of them any favors. That guttural edge and intensity, that's what we want to hear from Dre and Pusha-T. Hell, even Q-Tip sounds a little bit awkward against this brand of production on Cheers, and I was desperately hoping his more reflective vibe would work, because I like a lot of his content. Now, thankfully, Kendrick Lamar can hold his own on Tints. It's an awesome song, and all the more proof that Kendrick Lamar sounds so much better on funkier grooves than trap. Snoop Dogg can ride this production in his sleep, and you know what? Even J. Cole doesn't sound all that bad on an uncharacteristically playful verse. Yeah, I've got issues with whenever he talks about stalking girls on the internet, given that this is not the first verse that does that from J. Cole. But you know what? He sounds fine, even despite that choppy cymbal groove. But really, that's the truth about the majority of the grooves on this album, specifically in the percussion. When it doesn't feel ever so slightly blown out in the low end and kind of blocky, it's stuttering in a way that Anderson .Paak's flow can tumble against, but rarely flatters him, especially with synthesizers and keyboard tones pushing this in a more synthetic direction away from more guitars. And that's before we get the blockier trap elements on Smile Petty and Brother's Keeper that just don't work at all. Now, that's not saying that there aren't some good melodies here. I like the guitars on Brother's Keeper. Tints is one of the more obvious standouts, but the guitar switch up into the jingling pianos on Six Summers, it worked well enough. And once the manic horn line kicked in on Mansa Musa, I really dug it, especially when Anderson .Paak just snapped on that final verse. Really great change up there. Unfortunately, you also get the choices that just do not work. Like that teeny tone drizzle over Savior's Road that utterly killed the song for me, or the drowned out fizz of the melody on Who Are You. One thing's for sure, if you're getting this album, definitely get the bonus tracks, Sweet Chick and Left to Right. Yeah, the former's a goofy string of hookups and the latter is an ass anthem, but Sweet Chick does have a great soulful hook from BJ the Chicago Kid, and the groove on Left to Right is kind of genuinely awesome, even if I'm not totally convinced that Anderson .Paak can sell the more Jamaican vibe, but he makes it pretty credible all the same. But this takes us to the content. And remember how I said a big problem early on was structure? Yeah, if we're looking for where this album slips off the rails at points, it's here in a lot of the content. Mostly because where Malibu was somewhat grounded in a loose origin and foundation, Oxnard finds Anderson .Paak with the world ahead of him and an abundance of choice, and since he's not one to compromise on his ego, it leads to a record that often barrels past good sense more often than it should in order to feed his appetites, either for wealth or for sex, which makes for a pretty scattered listening experience from song to song. And look, I don't really mind the defensiveness in his flexing, which he feels he has justly earned, and he sneaks in a few smart points about how often his rappers say don't shoot in their bars. It's not like the cops are listening to hip-hop here. Hell, as he says on Savior's Road, it's not even like his own community pays attention to the faith that he tries to sell instead of just focusing on the sex anthems and the flexing. And while Six Summers is bound to attract a lot of attention for the Trump has a love child lines, it's tempered by the weary acknowledgement that Trump's probably going to wind up getting away with anything when he leaves office, and everything because he's white and rich, a luxury that a lot of minorities just don't have. And there's a moment of genuine introspection that comes when he tries to grieve for Mac Miller on Cheers and realizes that he's living just as hard. But it gets a little bit dissonant when you realize he's not about to stop anytime soon, maybe even embracing his inner asshole, and that doesn't quite have the same exultant air that Malibu did. And then there's the women. And look, I have tried to be forgiving about the skeevier side on previous albums, and there's at least some self-awareness on Sweet Chick to imply he's more just tactless than misogynistic. And the girl will make him pay for that, I appreciate that. But there's no excusing Smile Petty, where he tries to call a girl out for lying to him about what she truly wants in the relationship, even outright threatening to hook up with other girls in order to piss her off, and then auction the things he bought for her off before calling women petty, useless, and ruthless leeches. I mean, I know it's all supposed to be framed to be petty, but you can't really get around bars this sour and gross, and it only colors the defensiveness on other songs, especially when he talks about women, in a really ugly light. It really kind of taints the rest of the album by exposure. But as a whole, Folks, plenty of people have already said Oxnard is a bit of a letdown, and even though I was prepared for it, it still kind of is. But it is still a good album. But man, if this is the plan to push Anderson .Paak towards the mainstream, they missed the mark in a big way with this. The slicker production only flatters on occasion, the writing only contains more nuggets of wit than fully fleshed out songs, and Anderson .Paak's charisma can't save an otherwise pretty scattered thematic experience that wants to coast but can't really muster the comfort or the more developed groove. And I'm gonna blame Dr. Dre for the most for this. He mixed the majority of the album and seems to have completely misunderstood the grooves that work for Anderson .Paak's more unique timbre, but really, the direction is misconstrued enough to blame pretty much all parties. Still, I'm hoping this is just a misstep rather than a change in major direction, and again, there is enough quality to keep this good, but it's getting a 7 out of 10 from me, and really only recommended if you are a diehard fan. Otherwise, check out Malibu and Yes Loud first, and then maybe give this a listen. In this tour of the greater LA area, let's just hope this is a speed bump and we can continue just soaring on. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with this. I'm not going to deny it. I know some of you are going to get a little angry about it, but hey, that's what the poll in the comments are for. Go have fun. You want to buy or stream the album? Links down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, then the link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. You want to see schedules on my Instagram? Link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.